Shadows and silence. The bow trembled slightly in Prisha Kapoor's fingers as she drew it across the violin strings, coaxing out the haunting melody of Tchaikovsky's violin concerto. The notes filled her small apartment, bouncing off the walls that had become both her sanctuary and her prison. At 30, Prisha had mastered the art of disappearing from social gatherings, from photographs, from life itself. 15 years had passed since the acid attack that left the right side of her face marred with uneven, discolored skin. 15 years since her dreams of becoming a concert violinist shattered like glass on concrete. Not because she couldn't play, her fingers still danced across the strings with a virtuosity that her former teachers called once in a generation, but because she couldn't bear the thought of being seen. Final notes of the concerto hung in the air, and Prisha lowered her violin. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music. She glanced at her computer screen where an email from the Mumbai Symphony Orchestra glowed accusingly. Another invitation to audition. Another opportunity she would decline without explanation. You can't hide forever, her grandmother had told her before passing away 3 years ago. But hiding had become as natural to Prisha as breathing. She taught violin lessons online, camera always off, her voice and hands the only parts of herself she was willing to share. The buzzing of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Divya, her childhood friend and the only person besides her parents who still pushed past Prisha's carefully constructed walls. Don't say no immediately, Divya said when Prisha answered, not bothering with a greeting. The Healing Notes Foundation is hosting a fundraiser tomorrow night. It's for their music therapy program for trauma survivors. Prisha sighed. Divya, you know I don't. It's not a performance. Divya cut in. Just a cocktail reception. Dark lighting. Lots of people more interested in the free champagne than looking at anyone else. And they're announcing a new initiative for acid attack survivors. Prisha's fingers instinctively touched the scarred side of her face. Why would I want to be surrounded by people discussing something I'd rather forget? Because you're more than what happened to you, Divya said softly. And because Dr. Vikram Mehta will be there. Should that name mean something to me? He's revolutionizing music therapy for trauma recovery. His techniques have helped hundreds of people reclaim their lives after all kinds of trauma. And Divya paused dramatically. He's looking for a violin instructor for his program. No, Prisha, I teach online for a reason. I can't. I won't stand in front of a room of people staring at me. The silence on the other end stretched until Divya spoke again, her voice gentler. What would you say to your students if they told you they couldn't play because of something outside their control? The question hit Prisha like a physical blow. She taught children with everything from ADHD to physical disabilities, always encouraging them to find their voice through music when words failed. How could she preach courage while cowering in shadows? Fine, she finally said. I'll go, but I'm not staying long, and I'm not talking to this doctor. Later that evening, Prisha stood before her mirror, a rare occurrence these days. She carefully applied foundation to the ridged skin, knowing it would never fully conceal the damage. She arranged her long black hair to fall over the right side of her face, creating a curtain between herself and the world. The woman staring back at her had beautiful eyes deep brown with flecks of amber that once lit up when she smiled. Now they held a wariness, a perpetual readiness to flinch away from curious glances or pitying looks. 1 hour, she told her reflection. I'll give Divya 1 hour, and then I'm coming back to where it's safe. She picked up her violin case, her constant companion, headed for the door. She never went anywhere without it, a talisman of the one part of herself that remained unbroken after the attack. What Prisha couldn't know as she locked her apartment door was that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the careful fortress she'd built around her life would begin to crumble, one note at a time. Asterisk, the resonant stranger, the Healing Notes Foundation had transformed the historic Nariman Point Gallery into a shimmering ocean of soft blues and greens. Crystal chandeliers cast gentle light over the space while a string quartet played softly in the corner. Prisha clutched her violin case tighter as she entered, grateful for Divya's firm grip on her elbow. See, it's not so terrible, Divya whispered, guiding her toward a less crowded area. And look at the photographs. The walls featured black and white portraits of people with various visible different burns, amputations, or playing musical instruments with expressions of pure joy. Below each image was a quote about how music had helped them reclaim their identity beyond trauma. They look peaceful, Prisya admitted reluctantly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt that way herself. Dr. Mehta believes that music bypasses our conscious defenses, said a warm voice behind them. The brain processes rhythm and harmony differently than it processes trauma. Prisha turned, instinctively angling her scarred side away from the stranger. The man before her was tall, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, but he wore brightly colored socks with musical notes, a small rebellion against formality that made Prisha almost smile. You must be the famous Dr. Mehta, Divya said, extending her hand. Just Vikram, please. He shook Divya's hand before turning his attention to Prisya. And you are? This is Prisha Kapoor, Divya said when Prisha remained silent. The violinist. Vikram's eyes widened with genuine interest. Your former teacher Gupta Ji speaks of you with such reverence. He says you have the most extraordinary ear for emotional nuance. Prisha blinked in surprise. You know, Goop, he consults on our program development. He mentioned you teach online now. Vikram's gaze was direct but not intrusive. He looked at her, all of her, without the flinching or overcompensating stare that Prisha had grown accustomed to. I do. It's convenient, she replied stiffly. Vikram nodded toward her violin case. Did you bring that for a reason, or is it a security blanket? The question was asked with such gentle understanding that it disarmed her. Both Prisha admitted. I never go anywhere without it. Would you play something? Not for the crowd, he added quickly, seeing her expression. Just for me. There's a small practice room upstairs. I don't perform anymore. It wouldn't be a performance. Think of it as a conversation. He smiled, and something about his calm certainty made Prisha curious despite herself. Go, Divya whispered. I'll cover for you with my parents. They're dying to introduce you to eligible bachelors anyway. Before she could reconsider, Prisha found herself following Vikram up a narrow staircase to a simple room with a piano in the corner. He closed the door, and the noise of the party faded to a distant murmur. This is where I come when events get overwhelming, he confessed. I'm not actually fond of large gatherings. Yet you organize them, Prisha observed, setting down her case. Necessary evils for funding. He sat at the piano bench, leaving plenty of space between them. Play whatever you're feeling right now. Don't think about technique or impressing me. Prisha hesitated, then opened her case and lifted out her violin. This instrument knew her better than any person alive. She positioned it under her chin, took a breath, and began to play. She started with something angry or furious. Discordant piece that expressed 15 years of rage and isolation. Her bow struck the strings with such force that she feared they might snap, but Vikram didn't flinch. He watched with complete focus, occasionally nodding as if he understood every unspoken word. Without planning it, the melody shifted. The anger dissolved into something more vulnerable, a melancholy improvisation that spoke of loneliness and fear. Prisha closed her eyes, forgetting that she wasn't alone, forgetting to hide her scars. For 4 minutes, she existed only in the music. When the final note faded, she opened her eyes to find Vikram looking at her with undisguised admiration. That, he said quietly, is exactly why our program needs you. I told you, I don't perform, I don't teach in person. She began, carefully returning the violin to its case. What you just played wasn't a performance, it was truth. He leaned forward. Our participants don't need a perfect musician. They need someone who understands that music can express what words cannot. There are plenty of qualified teachers without. She gestured vaguely to her face. Yes, and they don't have what makes you exceptional, Vikram replied. Every scar tells a story of survival. Yours tells me you understand what it means to rebuild yourself. The directness of his words made Prisha bristle. You don't know anything about me. I know what you just told me through your music. He handed her a business card. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays, small groups. No pressure to share your story unless you want to. He paused. Just observe one session. That's all I'm asking. Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. A woman poked her head in, apologizing for the intrusion. Dr. Mehta, the donors are asking for you. It's time for your speech. Vikram sighed. Duty calls. He stood and straightened his jacket. Think about it, Prisha. Music saved you once. Maybe now you can help it save others. After he left, Prisha remained in the practice room, turning his card over in her hands. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen not a victim, not a tragedy, but a musician with something valuable to offer. She tucked the card into her pocket and gathered her violin. Perhaps she would go home and research this Healing Notes Foundation further. Perhaps she would even consider his offer. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to Vikram Mehta than the wealthy doctor with a charitable hobby she'd initially assumed him to be. Christendove, Healing Notes Center occupied the ground floor of a renovated colonial building in Prisha stood across the street, watching participants arrive for Tuesday's session. Each person carried an instrument case or small drum, some walking with confidence, others with the same hunched posture she recognized in herself. Just observing, she reminded herself. Finally crossing the street. Inside the center was nothing like she'd imagined. Instead of clinical white walls, the space was painted in warm colors with comfortable seating arranged in a circle. Instruments of all kinds from professional quality violins to simple percussion filled the shelves. Vikram spotted her immediately, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. You came, he said, approaching but maintaining a respectful distance. Just to observe, Prisha clarified. Of course. He gestured to a chair slightly removed from the circle. No pressure. As the session began, Prisha watched in fascination. The group, diverse in age, background, and type of trauma, started with a simple rhythm exercise. Vikram guided them through creating collective beats, encouraging each person to insert their own variation. What struck Prisha most was the laughter of these people with visible and invisible scars were laughing together. Music bypasses the analytical brain, Vikram explained to the group. It reaches parts of us that words cannot touch. A young girl with severe burn scars covering her arms struggled with her violin positioning. Prisha found herself unconsciously leaning forward, analyzing the issue. When the girl became frustrated, setting the instrument down, Prisha's hand tightened around her own violin case before she realized what she was doing. Prisha had moved to sit beside the girl. "May I?" she asked softly, opening her case. The girl nodded, eyes wide. Prisha demonstrated an alternative positioning. "I modified this technique after my injury. It puts less strain on your arm." For the next hour, Prisha forgot about her scars as she helped not only the young girl but several others with technical adjustments. When the session ended, she felt a strange lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Same time Thursday, Vikram asked as she prepared to leave. This time Prisha didn't hesitate. "I'll be here." Over the following weeks, Prisha became a regular at the center. What began as technical assistance evolved into her leading small group sessions for string players. With each passing day, she found herself hiding less both physically and emotionally. One evening, as she helped pack up instruments, Vikram brought her tea. "Why did you become a doctor?" she asked, accepting the cup. Their conversations had gradually become more personal, though Prisha still maintained careful boundaries. "I was supposed to join my family's business empire," he said, leaning against the piano. "But during medical school I treated a young musician who'd lost his hand in an accident. His depression lifted only when we introduced adaptive music therapy, so you've traded corporate millions for this." Prisya gestured around the modest center. Vikram smiled. "I still have the family money. I just use it differently than expected." He hesitated. "What about you? When did you start playing?" "Age 4, Prisya said. "By 16, I was preparing for international competitions." She touched her scars unconsciously. "Then everything changed." "The music didn't," Vikram observed gently. "Only the audience." His words stayed with Prisha long after she'd returned home that night. Asterisk dissonance and harmony, absolutely not. Prisha paced her apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "I can't do it, Vikram. It's a small venue. Just 30 people, all from our program or their families," he explained patiently. "The showcase is about celebrating progress, not perfection. I haven't performed publicly in 15 years, which is exactly why it would be powerful, not just for the audience, but for you." The showcase had been Vikram's idea, a private concert where program participants could share their musical journey. When he suggested Prisha perform as the closing act, panic seized her chest. "I'm sorry, I can't," she ended the call, hands trembling. That night, Prisha couldn't sleep. Images of Neha, the young girl with burned scars who now looked up to her, floated through her mind. Alongside the faces of others she'd come to care about at the center, she'd encouraged them to be brave, to use music as expression rather than escape. Was she a hypocrite for asking courage of them while refusing it herself? The next morning, she arrived at the center earlier than usual. Vikram was already there, sorting through sheet music. "I'll do it," she said without preamble, "but I have conditions." Vikram looked up, surprise giving way to a warm smile. "Name them." "Dim lighting. I'll be positioned stage left so my right side isn't as visible. And I choose the piece. Done. And obviously." He approached her slowly. "May I ask what changed your mind?" Prisha thought of all the moments over the past months. How she'd gradually stopped arranging her hair to hide her scars during sessions. How she'd begun making eye contact with strangers. How she'd even laughed openly last week without covering her mouth. "You did," she said simply. "And them, and maybe a little bit of me." The night of the showcase arrived with a flurry of nervous energy. Prisha helped younger participants prepare backstage, focusing on their needs rather than her own anxiety. Neha performed a simple piece with only a few mistakes, beaming with pride when she finished. "You're next, Miss Prisha," she whispered excitedly as she came off stage. Prisha took a deep breath and picked up her violin. As she walked onto the small stage, the spotlight felt like judgment. She positioned herself as planned and looked out at the audience. In the front row sat Vikram, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper that made her heart flutter. Beside him were her parents, who she'd finally invited back into her life after years of pushing them away. She closed her eyes, placed the violin under her chin, and began to play. She had chosen Massenet's Meditation from Taya, piece about transformation and redemption. Her bow moved across the strings with both technical precision and emotional abandon. Each note carried 15 years of hiding, of loss, of fear, but also of survival. As the final haunting notes faded, Prisha opened her eyes to absolute silence. Had she failed? Had they been horrified by her performance, or worse, by her scars? Then Neha stood, tears streaming down her small face, and began to clap. The entire room followed, rising to their feet. Prisha saw her mother weeping openly, her father's arm around her shoulders. But it was Vikram's expression that undid her completely, pure admiration without a trace of pity. For the first time since the attack, Prisha bowed deeply before an audience, her hair falling away to fully reveal her face. And for the first time in 15 years, she felt not shame but pride. The final movement. 6 months after the showcase, Prisya stood before a much larger audience, the guests at the Healing Notes Foundation's annual fundraising gala. No longer relegated to the shadows, she took center stage as she introduced the foundation's expanded program for acid attack survivors. "Music doesn't heal physical scars," she told the crowd. But it reminds us that our value extends beyond our appearance. When we play, we are not defined by what happened to us, but by what we create. The journey from that first night she'd met Vikram to this moment hadn't been without setbacks. There were still days when she couldn't bear to leave her apartment, when the stares of strangers cut too deeply. But those days grew fewer as her confidence grew stronger. After the presentations, Vikram found her on the terrace, gazing at the Mumbai skyline. "The board approved your proposal," he said, joining her at the railing. "Full funding for the outreach program in rural areas." Prisha smiled. "We can help so many more people now." "We," Vikram repeated thoughtfully. "I like the sound of that." Their relationship had evolved gradually from colleagues to friends to something more complex and unspoken. Vikram never rushed her, never pushed beyond what she was ready for. He'd become her most trusted confidant, the person who saw all of her scars' strength, and the space in between. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. "Open it when you're ready." Later that night, in the quiet of her apartment, no longer a hiding place but simply home, Prisha opened the envelope. Inside was a ticket to the International Vienna Music Festival, along with a note in Vikram's elegant handwriting. "The world deserves to hear you play, but only when you're ready to be heard. No conditions, no expectations, just possibility." Tears blurred her vision as she traced the ticket with her fingertips. Vienna had been her dream since childhood, a dream she'd buried alongside her hopes for a normal life after the attack. Her phone chimed with a text message from Vikram. "Whether you go or stay, perform or simply listen, you've already created the most beautiful music I've ever heard." The sound of someone reclaiming their life. Prisha moved to her window, gazing at the city below. For so long she had seen herself as permanently damaged, a beautiful melody interrupted by dissonance. But working with the survivors at the center had taught her something profound. Sometimes the most moving compositions incorporate dissonance alongside harmony. The contrast doesn't diminish the beauty, it deepens it. 3 weeks later, Prisha stood in the wings of a small theater in Vienna, violin in hand. She wore her hair pulled back, her scars visible to anyone who looked. In the front row sat Vikram, who had insisted on coming just to listen. As she walked onto the stage, she felt a familiar flutter of fear, but beneath it was something stronger, the steady rhythm of her own courage, built note by note over months of small victories. She lifted her violin and began to play, not just with her hands but with every part of herself, including the parts she had once believed were too broken to be seen in the warm light of the Viennese theater. Prisha Kapoor was neither hiding nor exposed. She was simply, completely present in her music and in her life, playing a melody that spoke of damage and healing, of isolation and connection. And in the front row, Vikram listened not to a woman defined by her scars, but to an artist who had transformed them into something profound, a symphony of resilience that would continue long after the final note faded into silence.